is the president of
Look at that. My helpers in the audience, the little elves helping me. Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Thank you very much. This is my living room. But it is really quite extraordinary. So thank you so much to Kristen, who sort of made this possible through her membership in the club. Thank you for coming tonight. Welcome to this holiday party for our wonderful community at the Pacific Council. It's incredible to see so many friends and supporters here tonight. This is my first holiday party as President and CEO. I'm deeply, deeply gratified that I recognize so many of you. When I first arrived here, of course, I didn't know a soul, and it was all just strange faces to me. And now you come, the more of these events you do, the more people you recognize, and it feels more, and particularly at this time of year, that's particularly welcome. So thank you very much for that. I'm also very, very grateful for all the experiences that I've had in my first 5 months in the job. They've been jam-packed with meetings, experiences, lessons, and personal growth. And that's largely thanks to your kind and often sincere and frank feedback. And I believe very, very firmly in that. I always tell people, please tell me exactly what you think, because it saves everybody a lot of time. And I'm very grateful that Angelinos appear to be quite frank. You don't beat about the bush, and that has helped me enormously. I'm also very, very excited for the work that we're going to take on in 2025, especially with regard to our Mexico initiative, for example, and our Korea task force that we're putting together, particularly relevant given this week's events. Our overseas delegations, one to Korea in late April, early May, and of course to Mexico in November of next year, where we hope to be able to be there for Day of the Dead in Oaxaca, which I think will be an extraordinary experience, in addition to the policy and intellectual components that we have. And of course our annual conference, which is coming up in March 13th, 14th. So if you haven't had a chance to put that on your calendars yet, then please do. Tonight we are truly honored to be able to welcome Admiral Linda Fagan, Commandant of the US Coast Guard. The US Coast Guard, and I didn't know any of this before this event was scheduled, because I decided I really ought to do my research and discovered that I didn't know a lot about the Coast Guard. I thought I knew, but I didn't know, and that's often the case, isn't it? But the US Coast Guard is the largest Coast Guard in the world.
Wow.
It's an integral part of US Armed Forces and Homeland Security, and performs a number of especially critically important functions. So first of all, the Coast Guard ensures maritime security. Our world, of course, is interconnected by trade, with over 90% of global commerce traveling by sea. The Coast Guard patrols our ports, intercepts illegal shipments, safeguards vital shipping lanes. This is critical to the nation's economy, ensuring goods move safely and efficiently. And I would say that beyond the nation's economy, remember that keeping shipping lanes safe is vital to the global economy as well. As a Brit, I remember very clearly my lessons as a child about the importance of the role that the Royal Navy played in doing exactly that in its day. Second, the Coast Guard plays a crucial role in national defense. Working alongside the Navy, it protects US waters from foreign threats. In times of conflict, the Coast Guard is a key player defending our coasts and supporting military operations worldwide. Third, the Coast Guard saves lives, and that's probably the function that many of us associate with the Coast Guard. It's the leading agency for search and rescue operations. Whether it's a distressed fishing vessel, a stranded recreational boater, or victims of natural disasters, the Coast Guard responds swiftly and effectively. On average, it saves 10 lives every day, a fact that underscores its humanitarian mission. In addition, the Coast Guard is at the forefront of environmental protection. It enforces laws that prevent illegal fishing, pollution, and environmental degradation. In an era where climate change threatens coastal communities, their work is more vital than ever. And finally, the Coast Guard promotes border security, intercepting drug smugglers and human traffickers trying to enter the US by sea. These efforts are critical in protecting Americans and maintaining the rule of law. So in a world of evolving threats, natural disasters, criminal networks, geopolitical tensions, the US Coast Guard's adaptability and multi-mission capabilities make it indispensable. Now, to moderate our fireside chat tonight with Admiral Fagan, we're delighted to have with us one of our members, Jean Soroka. Jean, welcome. a highly respected leader in the maritime and logistics industry. Executive Director of the Port of Los Angeles, which is the busiest container port in the Western Hemisphere, Mr. Soroka has been at the forefront of driving innovation. He's played a pivotal role in keeping flowing, especially during times of unprecedented challenges. His leadership in fostering sustainability, digital transformation, and community engagement have earned him the highest widespread recognition. It's also my distinct honor to introduce a trailblazing leader whose service and dedication have profoundly shaped the U.S. Coast Guard and inspired countless individuals across the nation. Admiral Linda Fagan is the 27th Commandant of the U.S. Coast Guard, holds the historic distinction of being the first woman to lead a branch of the U.S. Armed Forces. So great that we're in the Beverly Hills. Admiral Fagan's career has been marked by extraordinary accomplishments in operational leadership, policy innovation, and maritime safety. She began her journey as a graduate of the U.S. Coast Guard Academy and has served since then in critical roles, including Commander of Coast Guard Pacific Area and Deputy Commandant for Operations. Her expertise in maritime safety and security has been instrumental in safeguarding our waters and ensuring the Coast Guard remains a modern, agile force. A recipient of numerous awards, including the Distinguished Service Medal, Admiral Fagan is also recognized for her commitment to mentorship and breaking barriers for future generations. She embodies the Coast Guard's core values of honor, respect, and devotion to duty. Thank you all for being here. Thank you very much to Admiral Fagan and to Gene Soroka. Gene, I'll turn it over to you.
Dr. Wood, thank you so much. And thanks everybody for Admiral, to kick it off, I had a couple of pre-calls with your staff back in Washington and was given very strict instructions on how to program this visit tonight, but I do want to make a note of personal privilege before we start. Captain of the port, Stacy Creasing, is here tonight, leading the sector Los Angeles Long Beach. Stacy, would you please be recognized? This is who my staff and I work with every day on the operations, safety, and security report. And being now at the helm of the Port of Los Angeles for over 10 years, I've had the privilege, ma'am, of working with 5 captains of the port. Ryan Manning, who recently retired and is now with the Port of Long Beach in a civilian job. And before that, Rebecca Orr, County, and when I first came to LA back in 2014, it was Captain Jennifer Williams. And we are so proud that we've had such strong relationships, each getting better as the supply chain and its dynamics have gotten more complicated. So I just wanted to take a moment to recognize the great people that have been on the ground here in such an important gateway for global trade and the economy here in the United States. Captain, thank you so much for all you do. Blessed by talent from the United States Coast Guard. Even our new Chief Executive Officer in the Los Angeles City's Department of Water and Power, our municipal utility, which is the largest in the nation, is led by a 20-year reserve veteran, Janice Quinones, who is still active in the reserve force. So we're really fortunate here. I'd like to begin with your initial remarks to tell the group today a little bit about the United States Coast Guard, your mission, your vision, and what you see happening out there around the world today that you're charged with.
All right, thank you, and thank you all for being here this evening. It really is a privilege to lead the organization that we know as the United States Coast Guard. It is maybe the world's largest Coast Guard. I would tell you it's the world's best Coast Guard. Coast Guards around the world look to us, emulate us. Look no further than China Coast Guard. The racing stripes and some of their ships are modeled after the United States Coast Guard. I want to start with just some general scene setting about the Coast Guard as an organization. You heard a little bit in the introduction, but it is worth, I think, just highlighting the duality of the fact we are at all times a military organization. a military resident in the Department of Homeland Security, but I am also a law enforcement agency at all times. And the duality of authorities and capabilities that sit within a military organization and a law enforcement organization provide a flexibility and nimbleness, a uniqueness to the United States Coast Guard that is sought by partner nations around the world. I should also add, we are a regulatory agency. And so we write regulations, we perform our flag state responsibilities with the U.S. fleet of vessels. We work in the ports and in the harbors to ensure the readiness and resiliency of the marine transportation system, as it is the key driver of economic prosperity and civility, security in the nation. The Coast Guard is integral and involved in all that. I sometimes describe us as we're a maritime constabulary force. You could think of it in that context, where we've got law enforcement and responsibilities in the homeland, but we are also a forward deployed Coast Guard as well. The United States Coast Guard has fought in every one of the nation's battles and wars. And you could argue that we forward deployed for World War II and really never fully came back. And so, when somebody says, well, why is the Coast Guard operating in the Pacific? The Coast Guard has been operating in the Pacific for several hundred years. This isn't a change. Why is the Coast Guard in the Arctic? Again, we've been in the Arctic for 100 plus years, operating on behalf of the nation, ensuring our national sovereignty as a maritime nation. I should also highlight, well here in Los Angeles, how critical maritime approaches are to the community, to the nation, but some Americans sort of lose track of the fact that we are a maritime nation. We're an Atlantic nation, a Pacific nation, and we're an Arctic nation. And that uniqueness in our geography contributes considerably to our national security and national prosperity, and the Coast Guard is involved in many, many roles across those realms and domains in a way that contribute to that sovereignty. We talk about, we used to talk about our 11 statutory missions, so I'm not going to do that. It's actually kind of a boring way to talk about the Coast Guard. I find it more interesting to talk broadly about the organization and do it from a geographic context. So you look into the Arctic, and we are the nation's, we're operating the nation's surface asset in the Arctic. The patterns of behavior in the Arctic have changed significantly. The number of Chinese deployments in the Arctic this summer dramatically different than what we've seen in any previous year. Russia as well. Russia is an Arctic nation as well, so they've got their own sovereign interests there, so it's not a surprise to see them there. But then joint deployments of the Chinese and Russians in the Arctic that become concerning if you view it through a sovereignty and national security, national defense lens. Go over into the Pacific and the Western Pacific as you look at China Coast Guard and behaviors there with regard particularly Philippines, Second Thomas Shoals, operations inconsistent with maritime governance and rule of law, and we provide a counter to that. We work with many allies and partners in the area to help them bolster and enforce their own sovereignty. This is true in Oceania. We look south into Antarctica. And I do like to remind, we like to talk a lot about the Arctic, and we should because of our role as an Arctic nation. But Antarctica, we have equal national defense, national security interests there. And then, again, Africa, Europe, our other Arctic partner nations. The Coast Guard works across all of those portfolios, helping nations protect their own sovereignty, create capability, capacity, enforce the rule of law, and we do it in a way that, again, is consistent with maritime governance. And then there's the Homeland Mission, which most people do know us for our search and rescue work. Actually, we are some of the best in the world at that search and rescue work if you get yourself into trouble out there at sea. And I do like the caveat is if you're findable. Sometimes, sometimes that is actually a caveat. If you're findable, we will find you. We are exceptional at that work. But then all of the work in the homeland to put aids to navigation out and mark our harbors, to work with the shipping community and the facilities to ensure that that system runs seamlessly, so that, you know, if you're living in Kansas and you want your Nike sneakers for Christmas, the Coast Guard's got a huge role, along with the maritime partners, in making sure that happens. But you know, I'm going to stop there and look forward to the conversation and some of the questions here.
Yeah, that's a really good layout. Having worked overseas for 11 years, I got to see the Coast Guard in action in combination with the work that's been done in other theaters with other nations that we are counted on so greatly for, and that was pretty awe-inspiring to me. Shifting gears just a little bit, the U.S. Coast Guard is in charge of protecting the U.S. maritime system. How do you go about that responsibility? And what do you see are the biggest threats today and over the horizon?
Yeah, so we do talk about the maritime transportation system, and there are multiple elements to it, and we do have role and you know, engagement as a regulatory agency across a number of components of the element. One of the key ways that we go about it, and you know, the captain of the ports that sit in our ports. I happen to have been a captain of the port for New York. And one of the things that the captain of the port is able to do is they have convening authority. And through area maritime security committees and the committee structure, convene all of the interested parties in the port to come and talk about the threats, the issues, the challenges. And the power in that convening, in that group, and I'm certain you have the experiences here, is that while the Coast Guard the captain of the port actually has a veto vote if they wanted to exercise it, but that's not how we exercise that authority. It's done in a collaborative way, informed by all the entities, and you end up with really a maximized outcome to what some of the really difficult and challenging issues are. One of the challenges that I see is true across the ports in the United States. We used to view the maritime realm as an unconstrained domain. It's increasingly constrained. You know, more ships, larger ships, more people activity, more recreating, you know, pick the things, but increasingly the pressure to access and use the waterways creates tension points in the system, and keeping pace with that change, you know, whether it's alternative fuels or changing ship design and complexity is a challenge that's with us now. Cyber. Cyber is a threat across different sectors in the United States. But as you look at the cyber risk in the maritime realm, there's a lot that you've seen in that work and those threats that are evolving across the Pacific. You know, we used to, one of my predecessors talked about, you know, that we're entering an era of the Coast Guards. Well, I would argue we've always been in an era of the Coast Guards. Coast Guards, it provide for that maritime governance and rule of law that is necessary for maritime nations to benefit from the maritime realms. And so over the last 6.5 years in the Pacific, you see activity that erodes the rule of law and erodes sovereignty. So a specific example is in the realm of illegal fishing. So when a nation, and China is one of the worst offenders in illegal fishing, when they engage in illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing, and it's left unaddressed, it's theft of natural resources, and it's erosion of a nation's sovereignty. So one of the roles that the Coast Guard plays, and we've continued to engage and increase our capacity to do this, is to partner with nations through bilateral agreements to help assist them in enforcing their own sovereignty. So an example of this is a 270-foot medium endurance cutter that had been home ported on the east coast of the United States. A year ago, we changed the home port, the Harriet Lane, to Hawaii. Now Hawaii, if you've looked at the map, it's still a long ways from the part of the world we're talking about here, but it's closer than the east coast. And we use that ship to partner with nations, Vanuatu. We have a bilateral agreement with Vanuatu. Harriet Lane, who was in Vanuatu earlier this year, embarked 4 fisheries enforcement officials from Vanuatu, and we took them out into their exclusive economic zone to board fishing vessels, Chinese and others, to enforce Vanuatu's waters. So it's a great example of a partnership where we had the ship, but it was all about Vanuatu, their sovereignty, their authority in enforcing rule of law. The demand for that kind of partnership and engagement throughout the Western Pacific and Oceania. There was a cry for it 6.5 years ago. It is deafening, the demand that comes towards us for ship capacity, bilateral agreements, and training teams to help nations, their coast guards, and their navies build their own expertise and capacity. And one of the things that I've learned 2.5 years into this job is that, we talked about we are the world's largest coast guard. Most of the world's navies are actually operating as coast guards. And so an interesting reflection in the Royal British Navy, the first Sea Lord, who's my peer. It's a cool name, by the way. I think it's a cooler name than conversation. If you take the submarines out of the Royal British Navy's portfolio and you look at the rest of what they deal with, about 75% of it is Coast Guard, maritime governance, rule of law work, countering illegal migration, countering narcotics. And so I've grown to appreciate that I actually, and there are many more navies that I'm a peer of than some of the Coast Guards who can be smaller. If I were a Navy, I would be the 3rd largest Navy in NATO, to give it some context.
Wow.
So right, we tend to say, we're 55,000 people, we're not that big, a little shy of $13 billion a year, but we're the 3rd largest Navy in NATO, and the professionalism and skill that the workforce brings to this problem set is in high demand, and it continues to grow.
And interestingly, over the last 24 hours, just here in Southern California, the news coverage has been wide and far about an individual who was trying to send munitions and other technology, according to reports and open source data, over to North Korea. So this leads to the question of, we have so many codependencies, interrelationships, all on the same wavelength with the 6 branches of the military, the work that we do at federal, state, local level, like myself, the municipal here in Los Angeles. Why is the Coast Guard so important to that Pacific theater, to lead in these areas of not only looking out, but protection of these threats?
Yeah, and so one of the things that we do really well as an organization, I talked about cyber and the engagement, here locally within the community, municipality, and the community. But then, we talked about the work that we're doing to partner and engage overseas. And so the Coast Guard, I don't like to talk about it in a home game, away game, because it sort of implies that there's sort of a void there. The Coast Guard operates, across that continuum, competitive space, short of conflict, in a way that is really powerful. And I talked about the Captain Report's convening authority. One of our great strengths as an organization beyond the Captain Report is that kind of convening authority, partnership, engagement. We're a small organization. I need more resources. Everybody needs more resources. But one of the great strengths that we bring to these, multifaceted, difficult problem sets is bringing teams together, creating the environment for that collaboration and discussion, so that you can take a U.S. Coast Guard ship or the Vanuatu ship rider, or you're operating not just bilaterally with Japan, but multilaterally with Japan and Korea, Philippines. As the problem set continues to sort of grow and morph, those partnerships and allyships and how we leverage them as a Coast Guard, how we leverage them as a nation broadly are going to matter. I would argue one of our competitive advantages as a nation across the problem sets coming at us is our ally and partner a strength that we can rely on. There's a trust relationship there, that when things start to break bad, we've got people that'll stand up and stand next to us in a way that some of the great powers that we're encountering don't always have the capacity to rely on.
And if, at least from where I sit and my experience overseas, and still to this day, traveling the world, it's the brand of collaboration that the U.S. Coast Guard has created over decades that allows for other nations to let you in, talk a little bit, and work a little bit closer. This is not necessarily seen as a threat of the United States coming over. It's a collaborator for the U.S. Coast Guard.
Yeah, it's very, we have access and opportunity in ways that the U.S. Navy does not have. And we are very good at coming to a nation where they are. Not coming and saying, hey, I'm gonna do this big grand gesture over here. We're really good at saying, how can I help? What do you need from me? Oh, you need to know how to repair your outboard engines? We can do that. I recently had a meeting with the head of the Coast Guard, and the ask was, hey, I need to get better at launching small boats and doing law enforcement boardings at sea. I can do that for you. As opposed to my offering him a whole bunch of stuff that may or may not have been useful. And so the recognition that we will help you create and increase your own capacity, your own capability to enforce your own sovereignty in a way that's respectful of your sovereignty. It's really the sweet spot as we look across the Pacific.
So in the role of collaborator, enabler, what's the essential need that the Coast Guard has now, even as you move into the protector that we talked about at the top of this conversation?
Yeah, so I talked about being the only military service. So we're the only military branch in the Department of Homeland Security. And this does confuse people. They're like, are you in the military? You're not over here in defense. So just a funny story though, we had one of the European nations come through. It was like a deputy prime minister. He came to meet with me at Coast Guard headquarters and then went over to the Pentagon and met with the Secretary of Defense and was raving about the Coast Guard to the point that the Secretary of Defense had to say, you do know they don't work for me. We're the law enforcement and the work that we do in countering narcotics, preventing loss of life at sea, and illegal migration attempts are well suited for us to be situated in the Department of Homeland Security. But the defense, the budget structure in the country, it's defense and non-defense. And so the Department of Homeland Security sits on the non-defense side of the budget, and there are very strict budget caps on the non-defense side. So this creates a budget and a resourcing challenge that has been with us for a while, increasingly creating challenge ready and the budget that we need. From approximately $13 billion a year budget right now, we're the largest major acquisition projects, multiple projects since the end of World War II. So national security cutters, we've been fielding them for close to 15 years. Offshore patrol cutters, 2 are slated to come to the port here. The commerce cutters, polar security cutter. So I talked about our critical national security and national defense needs in the Arctic. So the nation we have one heavy icebreaker, the Polish Star, and she's currently en route. The workforce, there's a number of aspects, and the Navy has similar challenges around it. So one is getting the budget authority and money and figuring out how to do that in a way that doesn't artificially cap the need. The polar security cutter, while it will be operated by the U.S. Coast Guard, it will provide national defense and national security for our sovereignty as a nation. It's not a Coast Guard issue, it's a nation's issue and a national defense issue. And so that is a particularly difficult problem in the sort of job right now. I can give you good news though. About a week ago, we finalized the contract for a purchase of an existing icebreaker. So this is the IVIC, which was previously built by Shell for their attempts to begin drilling in the Arctic. It was about 8 or 10 years ago. Then when that endeavor sort of ended, the IVIC was then contracted by the Australians for 4 years, operated down in and around Antarctica, and we have just purchased that ship. And in fact, it is red with a racing stripe on it. It looks like a Coast Guard ship right now. I'm really excited. Now, we don't have a Coast Guard crew on it. We haven't, commissioned it as a Coast Guard cutter, but I am really, really excited. But that's an example of sort of a different way of creating capacity, because the need is here now. And so, ask kind of what the challenge. Budget authority, and a recognition that this isn't just about search and rescue, and the criticality of the marine transportation system and how it contributes to all of our economic well-being, and then the role we play in creating and enforcing our own sovereignty and national defense. The DoD guys talk about it, in the lethality game and conflict. Well, short of conflict, there's an awful lot of race-based competition that's going on now, then that will go on, and that the Coast Guard is in, and you need to, virtual presence is actual absence. You have to have ships in some of these rooms.
Now, this was meant to be a little bit of a warm-up, so I'd like to turn it over to the audience if we have any questions, sir. Okay, and could you introduce